Greetings, Little Warriors. Welcome to Little Wars TV. Now, if you watched our recent episode where we went over the events of Tombstone, the gunfight at the OK Corral and the Vendetta ride afterwards, you know that we used two different rule sets in that episode, both of which would be what would traditionally be called homebrew. They weren't professionally produced rule sets in any way. One of them was written by Chal here, and we just figured it would be interesting to have a discussion about homebrew rule sets and how they can be used, how to do them right, how to do them wrong, the different ways of doing them. So, Chal, you're actually a professional rules designer, rules author of many award-winning popular rule sets.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you come up with those rules and how someone who's sitting at home might do so, and how you go about even starting the process of writing some rules.
Yeah, just to follow it up, for clarity's sake, yes, when I was still an owner of Iron Ivan Games, that authored and co-authored a number of rule systems, enjoyed by tens of people around the world.
Dozens of fans,
yeah.
Dozens of fans.
But the question that you're asking is how does somebody go about coming up with a homebrew system? And I think it's very, very common, in particular with miniatures wargamers, more so than any other type of gamer that I can think of. Miniatures wargamers always seem to be wanting to add something into a system that they don't see, but they really want. And I think that's the heart of any homebrew system.
No, I think that's true. And I think, in your history, I know from the rules that you've written and even, the shootout rules, it was kind of building from the ground up, not necessarily taking something from other rule systems, although we all kind of use mechanics that we might like, and certainly folks have used mechanics that you've come up with in your game systems. But, then there's the way I tend to do it, which is more, start with an established rule set and then maybe make extensive modifications to it. But the goal is always the same. It's kind of try and represent that one thing in the rule set that I think is important for the topic of the game. With Shootout, what is the one thing that you really wanted to represent in those rules that served as the basis for you building the whole rule set around it?
Okay. Well, that's it's kind of a long answer, but fortunately we have a little bit of time. There's two components that I want to represent in Shootout, and one is very difficult to represent in a game, and that's the stress on an individual when things are going on. There is absolutely no way that you can replicate the real stress of a firefight in a game system. It's impossible. It cannot be done. But what you can do is you can put pressure on the player. You can make the player feel as if nothing they do is going to work. Now you're gonna see the kind of the problem in the system that I'm creating is because not everybody's going to enjoy this experience.
Very rarely do we actually enjoy the rule sets you come up with.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm here doing this instead of doing something more famous. But in Shootout, I want the players to feel uncertain about what's going to happen from moment to moment, so that they're fully invested in the gameplay. And that's in combination with the other thing that I want represented, especially for a skirmish game, is that individuals can get killed with single hits. Just like that. So what you see in the market are skirmish systems designed to replicate, say, Old West gunfights. And they will either be like a role-playing game, in which case it's difficult to kill models. It's difficult to kill off characters. Or they're a strict skirmish game, in which case it doesn't really have a lot of stress for you as a player. They're just models that you're just removing from the table. Shootout is more like a simulation. It's slower. It's certainly more complicated in ways. But the problem is that you, as say in like a game like Tombstone, Wyatt Earp can be killed immediately. First shot of the game, Billy Clanton can kill him, and he'd be out. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on the player. If that's the only model that you have to run, you're out of the campaign.
Yeah.
Because Wyatt's dead. It's really hard to explain because as an unpublished system, it just looks like a stack of papers. This isn't a particularly finished homebrew system. Other people finish theirs very nicely with color photographs, diagrams, all these things that you really should see in a system that you purchase. But that's one of the nice things about a homebrew system. You don't have to worry about that until you're ready to put it all together. You can just keep on adding and modifying and adding and modifying.
Yeah, if you even want to put it all together.
If you even want to.
And that's something that, I do a lot. When I talk about homebrew systems that I get involved in, as I said earlier, it tends to be more take the structure of an established rule set that I really like and maybe some aspects of the mechanics, but then dramatically change other aspects to more closely fit what I'm trying to do. And I think an example would be our Asandalwana episode. Mm-hmm. I love the Men Who Would Be Kings rule set, which if you watched Greg and my review of that rule set, you should know. That's not designed for huge battles like Asandalwana. So I had to make some very significant changes to the ranges, to the movement, to how certain things worked in that game, because I didn't want the very abstracted system of how far out the Zulus could be taken under effective fire or things like that. So I did a lot of experimentation on my tabletop and basically came up with a really quick one-page QRS that had all the differences on it, and all the players were able to use that. That's not an entirely new system that needs to have a stack of papers and illustrations and examples, because we're only using it for one game and maybe for some others in the future. If you are doing something that is much more involved and is meant to be almost made from whole cloth from A to Z, then I think it can be helpful to do that, and certainly if at some point you want to distribute it in some way.
Now, I think the method that you're referring to is the modification of an existing system by far is going to outweigh the number of instances of somebody coming up with a completely unique system.
Well, it's easier.
It's so much easier. Right. It's so much easier. And really what it is, there's a bunch of people sitting around playing in a basement or in a club or in a comic book store or whatever the case is. And they're like, oh man, I love this, but I wish.
Yeah.
I wish. And then that's where it starts. Well, then they say, well, let's home rule it. Let's create our own little home rule for that particular thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just at some point you have to recognize that you start drifting so far away from the main system. You have to make sure that your focus on the individual detail that you're trying to achieve, that you don't lose track of how the game actually functions. Right. And this is what I've seen in the past with people that I've known, for all these years, because I am an old man. Is that you see people that they get so focused on this one little tiny aspect that they feel is important, and they do something that kind of like just cocks the entire system off its rocker, and it doesn't work anymore, because now you're not playing the game about this particular war. You're playing this guy's unique focus on something he thinks is the most important.
Right.
The length of a spear. Is that the most important thing? And I'm not making that up, ladies and gentlemen. The length of a spear. Is it important? Sure it is. Should it be the primary focus of your mass battle system? I don't think so, but you could do that.
Yeah, and I think an excellent example of that is actually Greg's development of Altar of Freedom, which started as a homebrew rule set. I know it's out there for sale. A lot of you folks out there have said that you enjoy it, but it started as a homebrew system where he had two goals. I mean, it was make it so that mass battles in the American Civil War could be played out in an evening, but even more importantly, he wanted to do something that he didn't feel existing rule sets did, which was reflect the personalities and abilities of the individual commanders, at the corps and division level. And so that's why you have the turn clock system. That's why you have the activation system with the priority points. That's why you have all of the different general traits. But you and I have talked about this in the past with regards to that rule set. The flip side is, if he had kept a very, very complex mechanic for actually, doing combat on the table, that system very quickly would have overwhelmed the whole idea of trying to play out a battle in one evening. So it kind of required a more scaled back, stripped down combat system to allow the room for the command and control system. And I personally think he struck an excellent balance there. I am using that to make changes and come up with my own samurai era mass battle Japanese rule set. But even that, I'm going to have to make significant changes because there are very, very important differences between those two eras. But I think that's a good example of keeping your eye on the fact that the game has to be playable, has to be fun, and you can't ruin other mechanics just to make room for the ones that you like. I think the flip side danger, and I've actually seen this in the comments from a lot of our viewers when we've played some of these episodes using homebrew rules, is that they feel the need to hew so closely to rules as written. I think if you're coming from a tournament background where everyone has to be using the same rules that are published and used worldwide, that's a natural concern. But as you said, if you're just sitting in the club with your friends, make a couple of changes, make a half a dozen changes. Play it out. If everyone's in agreement, see how it works. And it may very well be that that's how you play that game going forward. And it's how you can run convention games if you want to. You just put the little modified thing afterwards.
Yeah, I think an area that you might see that a lot is that you have a system, say, like for World War II. We used to do a lot of World War II gaming. And in fact, going back to the Iron Ivan games, that was the primary focus, was World War II, that we did French and Indian War, World War I, and moderns. But World War II was the main thing that we focused on. But coming up with specific rules for particular theaters, a particular operation, a particular battle, that's homebrew as well. Mm-hmm. One that I can think of, again, going back to Iron Ivan Games, was that when I wrote Red Sun, Red Death, which was a Pacific theater supplement, one of the big things was creating the Japanese morale reaction table, which, believe it or not, if you go back far enough, it's difficult to find a lot of skirmish systems that included such a thing prior to Red Sun, Red Death.
Well, you're an innovator.
I'm an innovator. I may not have been exactly the first, but there weren't that many for sure. But the reason I did that was because I wanted the Japanese to have a reaction that somehow simulated the way that they fought in the Pacific, especially when they were under duress. That's just difficult to make a player do on their own. It's difficult to get a player to make his troops run out in the open so you can machine gun them, because no player is going to do that, though the Japanese would do that quite frequently when they were starting to lose battles. So that is me coming in and saying, hey, I don't want to disrupt the entire system, but I want to add a detail in that specifically suits this particular theater. I don't want to use it all the time. I don't want to see North African, Italian troops running across the desert with bayonets at entrenched British, because that's going to be a lot harder to get people to believe.
Sure.
But Japanese boiling out of the jungle, sure, that's going to look right on the table, and it did. People love that. People love that reaction table, even if they modified it themselves again, because they didn't like the way that I presented it, which is fine.
That to me is an excellent way for someone who maybe is interested in trying to homebrew something, jumping into it and getting a feel for how to get started. It's scenario design.
Yeah.
And you're talking about an entire theater, but any number of scenarios, even in established rule books, might have special rules that apply to that particular scenario. Well, when you're at home setting up a scenario and you think, well, there's this thing that really should be built into this scenario, come up with a rule for it. Part of the greatness about this hobby is the fact that it is tied to history. And so we have a story that we know that we've had told through real life experiences in the past by the soldiers on the ground, and we want to try and recreate that. A lot of times it's going to require specialized little rules. And it's not that really that big of a jump from specialized rules for a scenario to go to specialized rules for a theater, or specialized rules for an entire conflict or an entire side in a conflict.
Yeah, now there's 2 points that I want to make. The first is going to be short. The second one's going to be a little bit longer. The one point is, and I've seen people do this as well, is it's a mistake to try to say that one system can cover all things.
Right.
And if you start trying to homebrew a system to do something that's completely unsuited for, it's not going to work. You use the example of the black powder. The men who would be kings being modified into a mass combat system, and it worked. That game played excellently, but at the same time, you do have to be a little cautious in saying, like I said, we have Raven Feast, which was a free rule set released by the club. Would you want to use that to create some ultra futuristic robot on a robot combat system? Probably not. It probably wouldn't work so well. Would it work? Yeah, mechanically it would work, but it probably wouldn't play the way you want it to. So you have to be a little cautious. Interrelated, but it's going to sound like a completely different direction. You may have noticed that when I have done rules reviews in the club, even when I don't like a system, I'm usually trying very hard to be positive about the effort that people put in, even if I didn't like the game. That's not always the case with a lot of people that review rules. The reason I do that is because I recognize how difficult it is to write a comprehensive rule system that people enjoy. It is hard. Mm-hmm. And if you think that that's not true, and I don't mean this as a challenge or like I'm trying to make anybody angry, but if you don't think that's true, You take your homebrew system and you present it to a bunch of players that don't know you, people that you don't know, like at a convention, and just see what their reaction is when something comes up that they don't like. I've always been very considerate of the effort that an author puts into a system, because even if I don't like it, even if I don't think it works, I get that that's going to happen. And it takes a lot of trial and error and a lot of time and commitment to really come up with a system that's tight, that is unassailable, which there is no such thing. We can argue about any game system. There's holes in stuff I wrote. I mean, I'm not going to lie.
Sure.
Looking back on it, there's things I would change.
Well, you just said you can't write a system that covers everything.
No.
So if you can't do that, there's naturally going to be holes. And I think, to kind of riff off of your point a little bit too, everybody is different. Everybody is looking for something different in a game. I mean, we all want to have fun, but as to what a rule system reflects, everybody's different. It's very subjective. And so there are rule systems that I cannot stand playing, and I do not think are good rule systems, that thousands of people around the world absolutely love, think is the best thing since sliced bread. And I can't tell them they're wrong, because it works for them. And that's the key to any rule system that you come up with yourself. Any homebrew rule system. As long as you feel like it's a finely crafted craft beer, it doesn't matter that I think it's moonshine that's going to turn me blind. I mean, if it reflects what it is you're trying to get done, and if you and the people you play with have fun with it, that's really what matters. So don't try and bite off too much, and also don't try and please everyone. I think would be an excellent piece of advice.
Well, like kind of go back to the shootout, which of course if you haven't been in the club, you have no idea what this game is really like. Originally it was designed for these close in brutal gunfights, that American law enforcement has been involved in. Because the OK Corral is a law enforcement engagement, just like the same way the Lincoln County War is a law enforcement engagement. One of the prime examples of what you were just talking about is that I originally wrote the system to deal with Miami-Dade, the FBI shootout in 1986. Which, if you're not familiar with that, you look it up, people in federal law enforcement are very, very familiar with this gunfight.
Oh, yes.
Because it's extremely brutal, it's close range, and it is a kind of thing that was difficult to use. It was difficult for me to find any kind of system that was on the market that would replicate or present that particular gunfight in tabletop format. So that's why I had to create a system, because I wanted to game that out. I wanted to see what that would feel like. And I've run that scenario only 3 times in the club. And every time players' reactions are the same. They sit around stunned, trying to figure out what to do next. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So they're like in constant turmoil. And at the end, everybody's like, wow, that was crazy.
And I've never gotten to play.
You've never gotten to play. We'll have to do it. Because the last time was in those 1/6 scale models, which was great, which was fantastic. And it's not because I'm a genius, but it is because I sort of hit on a thing that wasn't represented. Nobody else had played a system like this, so it's a very unique experience. Why is it not marketed? Well, because this is so hard. This is so hard to write this thing. I don't know how I would get around to publishing it. And if I did publish it, there were people who would play this game and they would hate it.
Yeah.
They would absolutely hate it because the main guy gets shot right away, or they don't know how to do something that they really want to do, or it's too cumbersome. It's slow.
Yeah.
This 30-second gunfight for the OK Corral. I mean, in the game, that might be 40 minutes of gameplay. I mean, it's going to take a lot longer, and that's a sacrifice. That's a sacrifice. What's the whole point of that? The whole point of that is not so much to talk about my system, but to illustrate that I created the system for my own gaming perspective, my own gaming need. But yes, it's not going to work for everybody else.
If you watched our Tombstone episode, you know that we actually use 2 different rule sets, Chal's shootout rule set, but also Mark Fastoso's Ruthless rule set, which I think is also a great way of doing faster play, bigger shootout fights. And Mark is also a professional rules author. He's done Fireball Forward, a great friend of the channel here as well. And he was kind enough to put together a short video on how he developed those rules and throws in some more general thoughts on homebrew rules as well. So let's check that out.
Hey, I'm Mark. Welcome to my game room, and I'm here to tell you about the Homebrew set of rules, Ruthless. Now, it's called Homebrew because I kind of concocted it to fit a very specific need that I had, that I didn't feel like there were any rules out there that kind of fit the bill, right? I was in a contest that the Hawks put on at Historicon, and we all had to create a game, and all the components had to fit in this box. So to fit the rules in the box, I decided I only wanted one sheet of paper that gave me much more space to put other things. But there were no rules out there that were just one page. So I looked on the internet, and these guys in London, the North London Wargamers, had a set of rules. It was one page. It was called A Town Called Malice. And I looked at it and I thought, hey, this is really great. It's got some stuff that I think my guys would really think was great. So I took it and I kind of changed it. I put things into it that I liked, that I thought my guys would like. We'd have a great time with it. And sure enough, we did.
The sheriff got shot down in cold blood. He didn't do a single.
And then I took that set of rules and I said, hey, Little Wars TV, you guys might like it. They tried it, and then they changed it. And that's the great thing about homebrew rules. It's kind of scratching an itch that you might have. It's giving you rules to play a period the way you think it should be played, but you're not creating like a tournament set of rules where people all over the world have to play the rules the exact same way. You can take it for your club and change it, put your own tweaks, your own little rules in it to make it feel like your game. And an interesting example of a homebrew set of rules is Monopoly. Originally, Monopoly was called the landlord's game. You could play it in a capitalist version or as a socialist version, and the rules were just passed on through word of mouth from town to town, city to city, and people made their own boards, their own components. So you might play the landlord's game or Monopoly in St. Louis, different the way you played it in Boston. If you want to hear more about that, it's a really great story. Check out the podcast, The Dollop, the episode, The Landlord's Game. We'll put it in the link below. So I encourage you to take Ruthless to your club. Add a few things. Take some things away. Make it the set of rules that works for you and gives the most enjoyment and the most fun for you when you think of what a Wild West game should be. Take care and have a great time.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. Some excellent points in there. I think some things that people can really take to heart. So anything to wrap up this discussion about home rules that you might have for the audience?
I don't think so, except that, I'll just say be kind. Be kind to the published authors out there, whether I know them or not, whether I personally like them or not. It's okay to be upset with them if they're jerks in person, because there are a few floating around.
Well, that's different.
But be kind to them when they produce a system that you don't like. It's okay. Make your own. If you can do a better job, do it.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to try. That would be my advice. Don't be afraid to try. Do it. Get some friends to play it. Some that'll be honest with you, but kind as well. And don't be afraid to try. Play around with it. I mean, these are games.
Yeah.
You're supposed to have fun. If you want a game that doesn't exist, go out there and make it yourself. It doesn't need to take forever, and it can be very rewarding.
We used to get this at Iron Ivan all the time. People would ask us if it was okay to do something. And Keith and I would always say the same thing. Like, it's your game. It's your table. You do what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, like never told her you couldn't change something. Go ahead and change it. We may not change it the same way, but there's nothing wrong with you changing it for your table.
Absolutely. So thanks for watching. Hope you found this chat very interesting. If you haven't watched the Tombstone episode, be sure to do so. If you haven't subscribed, be sure to hit that button below. And if you like what we're doing here, head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/LittleWarsTV. Become a patron. You can get even more great content like this. Thanks again.